All right, let's get into it. We're going to take a scientific look at a topic that's, pretty central to being human, but is often surrounded by a ton of mystery and misinformation. Sex. People have been writing songs about it, changing fashions for it, basically since the dawn of time. But a serious, scientific approach? That's actually surprisingly recent.
And wow, isn't that the truth? The desire for it, or maybe the lack of it, has inspired poetry, it's made babies, and it has definitely driven people a little bit crazy. That's exactly why today we're going to cut through all that noise and just look at what the science actually says.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with how the scientific study of sex even got off the ground. Then we'll dive into the body's physical response cycle. After that, we'll get into the hormones that kind of fuel the whole thing, the psychology of what actually turns us on, and finally, we'll touch on the really important topics of orientation and the deeper purposes of intimacy.
Okay, first up. Now, believe it or not, the story of modern sex research doesn't start in a bedroom or a lab coat. It starts with millions and millions of wasps. Yeah, wasps. The guy we have to thank for this is Alfred Kinsey, and his backstory is kind of wild. He was an entomologist, a bug expert. He spent decades, and I mean decades, meticulously collecting and measuring over 5 million gall wasps. It was that incredibly intense scientific rigor that he then turned around and applied to a subject nobody was studying that way, human sexuality.
So you gotta understand, what Kinsey did was revolutionary for two big reasons. First, he treated sex as a subject for objective scientific study, just like his wasps. And second, by actually surveying thousands of real people, he blew the lid off the massive gap between what society thought people were doing sexually and what they were actually doing behind closed doors.
Okay, before we go any further, let's get a few key definitions straight, because it's going to be important. When we talk about biological sex, we're talking about the physical, anatomical parts you're born with. The reproductive plumbing that leads to the designation of male, female, or intersex. Now, that is completely separate from gender identity. This is your internal, psychological sense of who you are. For most people, their gender identity aligns with their biological sex, but for transgender people, it doesn't. So this is about what's in your head, not what's between your legs. And finally, there's sexual orientation. This is all about who you are attracted to, physically or romantically. It's a totally different concept from both your biological sex and your gender identity. Okay, so now that we've got those basics covered, let's move on and see what the body is actually doing during sex.
So if Kinsey took sex research out of the shadows, our next pioneers, Masters and Johnson, they took it straight into the laboratory. They wanted to literally map out the physiology of sex. And get this, to do their research, they invited almost 700 volunteers into their lab, hooked them up to heart monitors and all kinds of other sensors, and then recorded over 10,000 sexual cycles. Can you imagine? This was absolutely unprecedented, and it gave us the first real physiological map of what happens to the human body during sex.
And this is what they found. They were able to document a clear 4-stage cycle. It starts with the excitement phase. Blood rushes to all the key places. That builds during the plateau phase, where your pulse and breathing really climb. Then comes the orgasm, with muscle contractions and that peak experience. And finally, you have the resolution phase, where the body gradually returns to its normal state.
Okay, so we've covered the physical mechanics. Now let's talk about the chemical messengers that get the whole process started in the first place, hormones.
This is such a great way to think about it. Hormones like testosterone and estrogen are absolutely necessary to get the engine running. But here's the crucial part. Once you have enough fuel in the tank, adding more doesn't actually make the engine run any faster. A half a tank works just as well as a full one. So really, our sex hormones have two main jobs. First is development. They're the ones that guide the physical growth of our sex characteristics. The second job is activation. They help flip the switch on our sexual desires. This is why you see those big hormonal shifts during puberty that spark interest, and why later in life, as hormone levels naturally drop, desire often decreases too.
But look, hormones are only part of the story. Our minds are just as important, maybe even more so. So let's get into the psychology of it all.
Check out this statistic. It's pretty stunning, right? If nearly everyone fantasizes about sex, it just goes to show how much of our desire is really driven by what's going on up here, in our heads. So what are those psychological influences? Well, it really boils down to three main areas. You've got your internal stimuli, that's your imagination, your memories, your fantasies. Then there are all the external stimuli, all the sexually charged content we see in movies, ads, and music. And crucially, all of this is shaped by our social and cultural factors, the values we get from our family, our society, and religion. And none of these work in a vacuum. They're all constantly influencing each other.
All right, let's move into our final section where we're going to tackle some of the most misunderstood aspects of human sexuality: orientation and the fundamental reasons we seek out intimacy in the first place.
Now, this is so incredibly important to understand because there is just so much misinformation floating around. Decades of research have shown absolutely no evidence that sexual orientation is caused by any of these things. Not your parenting style, not your hormone levels as an adult, not your personal history, none of it.
And this brings us to the crucial point that the vast majority of scientists and psychologists agree on. Just like your height or your eye color, sexual orientation is a naturally varying trait among human beings. It is not a choice, and it cannot be changed.
And that whole idea of misinformation, it extends to other parts of sexuality too. For instance, let's just clear this one up once and for all. For ages, people were told that masturbation could make you go blind or cause mental illness. The reality, it absolutely does not. It is a persistent myth that has caused a lot of needless shame, but it has zero basis in science.
So after looking at the biology, the chemistry, and the psychology, we come back to the biggest question of all. Why do we even have sex? And the reasons, it turns out, go way beyond just feeling good.
And this really shows the bigger picture. Yeah, sure, sometimes it's about procreation, but it's also a powerful tool for reducing stress, for creating social bonds, and for expressing love and commitment. It serves so many of life's most basic and important purposes, and it really contributes to our overall fulfillment as people.
And that leaves us with this final thought. After everything we've looked at, from hormones to physical responses, it all comes back to the mind. Our thoughts, our emotions, our connections, those are what truly shape our sexuality. It's a powerful reminder that the most significant sex organ we have is and always will be the one right between our ears.